What are the odds? I haven't seen or heard from her in 10 years. Of course, that's because I disappeared and did everything I could to avoid being found by her, her new husband, and his family. I was pretty successful at it, too. Yet, there she was, standing in a booth at the expo for the same convention I was attending. She even walked right past me without even recognizing me. When that thought struck me, I began to form a plan. Oh yes, I can be a real asshole at times. I should give you a bit of background here. You may also be wondering why my ex-wife's husband's family would be looking for me. It probably has something to do with the fact that they were, at one time, also my family. You see, her current husband is biologically my older brother. Of course, his parents are also biologically my parents, and his 2 younger sisters are my biological sisters as well. When everything blew up, I simply walked away and created a new life for myself. So, my name is Marvin Anderson. It's been my name for the last 10 years, Marvin because that was my given middle name, and Anderson because I looked up and saw a sticker for an Anderson window when I was trying to think of a good last name to use. The which I've been talking about is Beverly Curtis. She was Beverly Stinson in high school, long, drawn-out high school romance. Here, use your imagination. Yes, we were high school sweethearts. Yes, we gave each other our virginities after our senior prom. Yes, I was in love with her. Yes, she was in love with me. Well, okay, with my family's money. Too bad I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, my family had money. Mom and Dad owned a medium-sized manufacturing plant. We manufactured electronic components. We had several standard components, but that wasn't our main source of income. Seriously, the Chinese kicked our butts with their prices. We kept up with the Made in America requirements. Most of our market was small-scale, high-value items. It was specialty components that we designed and built based upon the customer's needs. It turned out that it was highly profitable. Okay, so some info on my family. There was Mom and Dad, of course. They started the business before I was born. Dad had a degree in electronic engineering. His best friend had a degree in manufacturing engineering. My great-grandfather on my dad's side made a ton of money during the Depression by loaning money to people who couldn't afford it to buy houses. When they couldn't make the payments, he foreclosed on the land. He actually sold the same piece of land several times to different people. Maybe that explains where my family got their serious lack of morals from. So, Brad is my older brother I told you about. Mom and Dad, of course. I also have twin sisters who are younger than me. Truthfully, they were the babies of the family and the only daughters. Yes, they were spoiled. Their entire outlook on life was that if it didn't directly affect them, they didn't give a rat's ass. If it did somehow affect them, they went with the decision that least affected them. That probably explains their behavior when things hit the fan. So, cliché after cliché, we got married just after our sophomore year in college. We had been married for 5 years when I came home early one day and found her in bed with my older brother. Long story short, I was just a stepping stone to her. Brad would eventually take over the family business, and I would remain a glorified worker bee. Sure, I would be technically second in charge, but it would be Brad with all the power, prestige, and access to society. Bev and I went to high school together. We started dating during our senior year. We both went to the local college. She ended up pregnant at the end of our sophomore year, so we got married over the summer. She dropped out to raise the baby while I went on to finish my degree. We had lots of help from my family. We were both 20 years old when we got married. Once Jenny turned 2 years old, Bev went to work as an administrative assistant at my family's business. They had an on-site daycare for their employees. I had to wonder how she got pregnant since we always used condoms. None ever broke as far as I know. She had a bad reaction to the pill, so she wasn't on it. Oh well, it happens. I did notice a couple of strange episodes over the next 5 years. Twice she had some issue that prevented us from having sex for about a week. I didn't really think much of it at the time. I wanted more children, but it hadn't happened yet. I was hoping that we would have a boy this time. I did love my daughter, but every husband wants at least one boy to carry on the family name. Yes, I hear all you feminists out there who say a woman can keep her married name. I also hear all of you screaming that a father can teach his daughter all the things he can teach a son. Yes, girls can be gearheads and appreciate muscle cars and racing just like boys. Yes, they can become mechanics, get into sports, and everything else. Again, it's one of those things programmed into men's brains. They want a son as an heir. Don't get me wrong, I loved my daughter and was happy that we had her. Adding a son to the family would have been icing on the cake. Our 5-year anniversary was coming up at the end of the week. I had ordered her a nice matching set of earrings and a necklace from a local jeweler. I snuck out of the office to pick it up and planned to sneak home to hide it while Bev was still at work. We both worked at my family's business, which had a daycare for employees, so she didn't need to worry about watching our daughter. I picked up her gift and rushed home. As I was approaching the house, I saw Brad's car in the driveway. That was odd. He was supposed to still be at work, and he had no business being at my house at this time of day. I got a bad feeling about this. I parked on the street, 2 houses down, and walked to the house. The door was unlocked. I quietly followed the sounds and made my way to the master bedroom. Sure enough, Brad and Bev were both there, having a grand old time. To this day, I'm still not sure how I managed to keep my temper in check. Regardless, I managed to get a good 5 minutes of video before sneaking back out of the house. I had overheard some of their conversation, and it sounded like this had been going on for a few years at least. Despite the rage I was feeling, I knew I had to take the time to gather all the information and put a plan together. Flying off the handle would only cost me more money and humiliation. The divorce laws in this country screwed over innocent husbands while rewarding cheating wives. That was especially true if there was a child involved. She would get the house, and I would get the mortgage. She would get custody and child support, and I would get missed visitations. She would get alimony, now called spousal maintenance, and I would get the honor of paying her to have sex with other men. To minimize the damage, I had to keep this a secret until I was ready to strike. Oh, and she would not be getting the jewelry I just bought for her. It took 3 months before I was ready. Now, you may be expecting me to tell you all the clever ways I went about avoiding having sex with the woman, and you would be wrong. She is a beautiful woman with a fantastic body. I had sex with her as much as I could. Besides, it wasn't like I was really risking getting a disease. She was only screwing my brother, not the whole town. The other thing was that if I suddenly began avoiding sex, she would get suspicious. No, I performed an Emmy Award-winning act of being the loving husband and father. Besides, I did not want to pay someone I don't know to get off. I didn't mention it before, but I was the IT manager for the company. It became apparent that the rest of the family thought so little of me that they must have never even considered that little fact. My team was responsible for all the software, hardware, and programming on every computer and machine in the company. I had unlimited access to everything that required any sort of computer code. I am the only one in the company with what I call the God codes. Those codes give me unlimited access to every machine the company owns: laptops, desktops, smartphones, CNC machines, 3D printers. Hell, I even reprogrammed the coffee makers in the break room. A little piece of advice: if you're going to screw over the IT guy, don't use company assets to discuss it. 5 minutes after getting to my office, I was reading all their text messages and emails. Yes, I said all of them. I started with just Bev's and Brad's, and from there, I found out that my parents had known about it as well. One text from Mom even discussed it with the twins and cautioned them to make sure they didn't somehow let me know. Yes, my entire family not only knew that my brother was sleeping with my wife, but they also seemed to approve of it. Now, you're probably thinking that I was at the edge of the breaking point, and you would be correct. I really didn't see how this could get any worse. That was when it got exponentially worse. Jenny wasn't even my daughter, she was Brad's daughter. Those 2 episodes that I mentioned earlier, which prevented us from having sex for a while. Abortions. She had 2 abortions because I was the biological father. She had Brad's baby, but she aborted my 2 children. They needed to pay. They needed to pay a lot. The more I discovered, the more I planned. Don't ever mess with the IT guy. You may be wondering why I know this. It turned out it was just plain old greed. Brad was being groomed to take over the company. I was never going to be more than a minor shareholder, kept on as the head of IT. They were going to string me along as long as they could before Bev asked for a divorce so she could marry Brad. His income was going to be much higher than mine ever would be. Why the wait? It's simple, they needed me to keep the machines running until they could find someone to replace me if needed. Sure, they hoped I would just accept the situation and stay, but they also wanted a backup plan in case I left. Besides, I was raising their child and supporting Bev, so Brad had less to pay out. He could build up his finances to better take care of his wife and child later. They were also planning on never telling me about the true parentage of Jenny, thus leaving me on the hook for boatloads of child support payments. For the next 3 months, I began to slowly siphon money from our investment accounts to a new account in the Cayman Islands. I sold Bev on the idea of taking out a second mortgage on the house to install a huge swimming pool and entertainment area in the backyard. Of course, she agreed to that. It would allow her and Brad to do more entertaining, and I would be on the hook to pay for it. It took a full month for the loan to go through. I stashed that money in the offshore account as well. I brought home some designs about once every 2 weeks to show her that I was working on it. I did the designs myself while I was supposed to be working. I even put a notice on an online website that we would be taking bids on the work. We ended up interviewing 5 different contractors. I hired a private investigator to place hidden cameras in the house while Bev was at work. They were high definition and also recorded audio. Everything was recorded to a cloud server that could only be accessed by me, the PI, and my divorce lawyer. I continued to copy all their emails and text messages. I also printed out hard copies and kept them in a new safety deposit box I had opened in a different bank under a new name, Marvin Anderson. I'm not a stupid person. I knew that when things hit the fan, everyone involved would be furious. They would begin a campaign of harassment and try to recoup the costs for the damage I was about to unleash. I created a couple of online social media profiles and also set up a fake website showing that Marvin Anderson was a very wealthy entrepreneur. He had an MBA and 2 bachelor's degrees, one in business administration and the other in international finance. Neither would hold up to any real scrutiny, but that wasn't necessary at this point. Forged documents are also fairly easy to obtain if you know where to look. It only requires an official-looking photo or 2, some false information, name, address, and other details purchased off the dark web, and a small amount of cash. About 2 weeks later, you get an anonymous package delivered to your office. Don't ever mess with the IT guy. Yeah, you can't simply rely on the words of liars and cheats. I had a DNA test done as well. I swabbed Jenny's cheek while she was sleeping, swabbed my own cheek, and then managed to get Brad's DNA off a glass he had used during a party. I sealed everything up and shipped it off. I used my company email to get the results. After all, I was the only one in the company who could access anyone else's email, and I was actually looking forward to them finding that email after I left and they began their own investigation. Okay, so you can pretty much figure out that I was going to burn Bev in the divorce. You can also see that Brad was going to be singed a bit as well. Now to roast Brad and the rest of the family. Brad wasn't going to be too hard to deal with. Brad was a bully as well as an arrogant fool. All I really needed to do was let him be himself. When he took over the company, he would drive it into the ground. His ineptitude would ensure the company's demise within a couple of years. Not only would the company go bankrupt, but he would also become a pariah in the industry for destroying a very profitable business. I figured I could help him along in that endeavor. First off, I figured the family owed me for what they were doing and planned to do to me. I did what I do best: fake accounts, fake invoices, and a couple of lines of code in the financial programs. Nothing too big that would be noticed, but big enough to hurt when they found out. Also, it was big enough to set me up financially for a long time if I needed it. Marvin Anderson was about to become rather wealthy. The next thing was to build and set the timer for the bomb. This took me a week to build. No, it wasn't a literal bomb that would cause physical destruction and injuries. I'm a computer programmer, not a criminal. This was a software bomb. It would cause havoc, but only in the financial and operational efficiency of the company. It was set to go off under a specified set of circumstances. I could either set it off by command or it would go off when certain pre-programmed events took place. It would cause every computer and smartphone in the entire company to simultaneously crash. Every computer-controlled machine would either stop working or, worse yet, go haywire. For those that went haywire, I had a special plan. Those were the CNC and milling machines. Finally, the day came. I know I probably should have done it differently. It might have been better or at least safer if I hadn't actually been there. Being present gave them the chance to physically confront me. That was a downside. It meant they could possibly hold me there and physically threaten me. Yes, that was kind of foolish on my part. Still, a train wreck is fascinating. There is a reason people can't look away when they see one about to happen. It's almost unheard of to get enough advanced warning to plan on being there and watching it. I simply couldn't resist. I did have a plan to distract them long enough to make my escape if needed, but it wasn't necessary. I was in the main lobby of the offices when I saw her walk in. She was in her mid-20s and dressed professionally. I have to say she was absolutely gorgeous. She was carrying a briefcase and 3 manila envelopes tucked under her arm. That was the signal for me to begin smiling. I walked into my father's office. "What's this?" he asked as I tossed a sealed envelope on his desk. Instead of answering, I held up my hand with all 5 fingers spread. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I counted as I lowered my fingers individually during the countdown. A loud moaning wail from outside was heard. 5 more fingers were held up, and another countdown began. "What the hell?" a man's voice was heard yelling. One last countdown, and the blonde bombshell appeared in my father's doorway. "Mr. Nathan Curtis?" she asked in a Georgia drawl that sounded like peaches and honey. "Yes, I am," he replied. She handed him the last envelope and stated, "Y'all have been served. Have a nice day." She took a quick photo of him holding the envelope and was out the door. That should explain everything. I laughed and quickly made my exit before anyone could regain their composure and make my departure difficult. The letter I dropped on my dad's desk was my immediate resignation, citing a hostile work environment. This was based on the company's management and owners accepting and encouraging the sexual relationship between the president of the company and the wife of one of their managers. Of course, Bev was served with divorce papers, and Brad was served with a lawsuit for creating a hostile workplace and alienation of affection. I was also suing him for back child support as well as future child support. I had removed all of my personal effects from my office a couple of days ago. I had also quietly removed everything I wanted from our house. All the financial matters had been taken care of as well. The divorce granted Bev the house, and I had cleaned out most of the savings account. My lawyer had a power of attorney, so she could act on my behalf without me actually being present. When the door closed behind me, Michael Curtis died, and Marvin Anderson came to life. That was the last time I saw any of them. For the next 10 years, counseling was ordered. My lawyer had no idea where I was, and I wasn't telling her. The case was dropped. I was ordered to pay child support. My lawyer had all the evidence that Jenny wasn't my child and that they had deliberately deceived me on that fact. My countersuit against Brad for child support was successful. She tried for alimony, but I was no longer employed and she was now making more money than I was. My lawyer graciously refused any alimony payments from her. As for the house, my lawyer produced a quitclaim deed and told her she could have it. The rest of the assets that were still there were given to her. Brad moved in before the week was out. I had relocated to the West Coast, so the alienation of affections lawsuit went nowhere, as they usually do. Brad did need to pay me a couple of $100s for creating a hostile work environment. He was the boss and screwing an employee's wife didn't go over well with the judge. The company settled for about $2 million when the evidence showed that they knew about and were actually encouraging the affair. I ended up with just over $4 million between the lawsuits, the money I skimmed, and the investments and savings I took. Yes, she should have gotten half the savings and investments, but good luck finding me or the money. I waited for about 6 months after all the suits were settled before I triggered the bomb. It fried the servers and rewrote all the coding for the CNC machines. Financial data was lost, and the machines began spitting out products that were out of spec. It took 2 weeks before everything was fixed, 2 weeks with no production. That threw off a lot of the scheduling and caused several missed deadlines. I ended up starting my own IT consulting company. I used an offshore LLC to keep my name off of it and became fairly successful. 2 years after I left, I was involved in a traffic accident that required significant facial reconstructive surgery. I decided to use that to my advantage and modified a few features that I really didn't like. I always thought my nose was too big, so I had it made smaller. My chin was a little weak, so I had that fixed. Just a couple of small modifications, since I always hated my chin. I had maintained a goatee since I was 18 years old. Now, with my chin reshaped, I began going smooth-shaven. With just a couple of minor changes, I looked completely different than I did before. The trucking company that owned the rig that plowed into me was paying for it anyway. One other change was that I was also in much better shape. I was always fit, but not overly so. Sure, I spent a couple of hours a week in the gym, but it wasn't exactly hardcore workouts. It was mainly just to keep me from getting soft. After the accident, I went through some rather rigorous physical therapy that got me into the habit of working out harder. It sucked at first, but I soon discovered that it made me feel a lot better. I began to notice that I was looking better as well. Before, my stomach was flat. Now, it had a defined, hard six-pack. My chest, legs, and arms bulked up as I added muscle. I went from an average, sort of thin office worker to a muscular, confident man. Yes, it was totally their fault. The driver was speeding, had been driving for too long that day, had forged his logbook, and the truck was lacking proper maintenance. I ended up owning the company. I immediately instituted new safety rules and ended up firing 5 drivers. The company's reputation improved, and we were getting more business. I had to sit with the NTSB regulators and outline my plan for improvements. I kept them updated. Once the insurance company saw what I was doing, the insurance rates dropped as well. It didn't take long for my new policies to get around, and the business's reputation increased dramatically. We delivered on time and safely. I hired a couple of new mechanics and made sure that all the trucks and trailers were properly maintained. Between my consulting business, the trucking company, and a plethora of good investments, I was very well off. Now, I was looking across the room at my ex-wife for the first time in 10 years. Those old feelings of betrayal and anger began to surface again. Sure, I got all of them out of my life, but they never got punished for what they did to me. I never got any real revenge on any of them. That's when an evil plan began forming in my head. I would pay them back the same way they betrayed me. It was obvious that Bev hadn't recognized me. She walked right past me, looked directly at me, and smiled. It was one of those smiles that women give to a man they are attracted to. It wasn't really flirty, just probably unconsciously telling him that she finds him attractive. This was going to be fun. I knew her weaknesses and motivations. It was just a matter of using the proper bait on the hook. I had exactly the proper bait I needed for this. Suddenly, I had a thought. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. Yep, perfect. My plans expanded to include even more destruction. I just needed to convince her that it was safe. I sauntered over to the booth she was at. I really had no use for anything that her company provided, but she didn't need to know that. I began looking at the brochures on the table, pretending to be interested. "Do you have any questions about any of our products or services?" a feminine voice asked. Pretending to see her for the first time, I answered, "Actually, I do have a few questions, but I'm afraid that I don't really have the time right now to properly get all the information I would like. I am interested in a couple of products, and I'll need a large supply of each. Unfortunately, I'm on my way to a meeting right now." "Oh, okay. Can you stop back by later?" Unfortunately, I won't be available until about 7 o'clock this evening. I believe that's when the expo closes tonight. Tell you what, here's my card. I'll be hanging out in my hotel this evening, so give me a call and I can meet you somewhere and answer all of your questions. The prospect of placing a big order had her interested. How about this? I'll make dinner reservations at Mario's for 7 o'clock. It's right here in the hotel, and I've heard it's one of the best Italian restaurants in the city. You can meet me there for dinner, and we can discuss what your company has to offer. Deliberately looking down at her left hand, I added, and you can bring your husband along as well. After all, it's a business dinner. Oh, and here's my card. My name is Marv Anderson. I own Mac Industries LLC. I have a few different businesses that could use some of your products. Her smile grew bigger. She probably didn't know anything about me personally, but she was very well aware of Mac Industries LLC. I could practically see her eyes springing out of her head in the shape of dollar signs. She then took more than a quick look at the tailored Armani suit I was wearing. That would be great. It will just be me, though. My husband couldn't make it this time. That's okay. Do you want to ask any of your colleagues to join us as well? I asked, as if she wasn't about to share any commission with anyone else. Unfortunately, they will all be unavailable. It will just be myself. I'm sure that I can answer all your questions. I gave her a big smile and sauntered off across the room to the exit. No, I didn't have a meeting to go to. I went back to my suite. Of course, I was in a penthouse suite, preparing for my revenge. After showering, shaving, and everything else to get ready, I got dressed in another Armani suit. I couldn't wear the one I had on earlier. That would just show that I wasn't as rich as I needed to be. When I arrived at the restaurant lobby, I saw Bev was already there. She had apparently gone all out to impress. Her LBD was cut low, and the hemline was high. She was standing in 5-inch CFMs, and I was interested in whether or not she was wearing thigh-highs or stockings and a garter belt. The plunging neckline made it obvious that she had foregone a bra, and I couldn't make out any panty lines where the tight dress molded itself to her delectable hips. Forget needing to dangle the bait in front of her, she was letting me hand-feed it directly into her mouth. This was going to be so easy, it was almost boring. Okay, so she actually did answer all my questions over dinner. She also explained why her product was superior to the competition. We discussed costs and quantities. I made the appropriate noises about being impressed, and when we were ready to place the order, she would be the one we called. I couldn't place the order this week because we were still in the process of determining exactly how large the order would be, how many units of each would go to which location, and a few other issues. Whatever order we did place would be within the next 2 weeks. Little did she know that I had absolutely no use for any of her products, and even if I did, I wouldn't purchase them from her company. I would go to her largest competitor instead. After dinner, I suggested that it was still early and maybe we could hit the nightclub next door for a drink or two. She was more than happy to comply. I'm pretty sure that while she was getting ready for dinner, she took the opportunity to look up my information on the internet. It would show her that I was indeed as wealthy as I appeared. The way she held my arm and molded herself to me as we danced, I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking of trading up again. After a couple of drinks and several dances, we were up in my suite. No, she wasn't drunk, she knew exactly what she was doing. She was the one who suggested it. Yeah, I could see the dollar signs shining in her eyes. Oh, and I discovered while we were sitting in the club that she was indeed not wearing panties. Instead of even the slightest protest as I slid my hand up her thigh, she just smiled and spread her legs wider in invitation. I'm not on the pill, she huffed as I kissed and nibbled on her neck and earlobe. Don't worry, I've been snipped. Allergic to latex, so I can't use condoms, I replied. I would love it, she smiled. She probably should have thought a bit more about it, but I was doing everything I could to distract her. We went 3 rounds that night. The next day, she moved all her things into my suite. We had sex every night. So, is there a Mrs. Anderson, fiancée, or girlfriend? She asked on the last morning of the conference. I was wondering if she would eventually ask about that. It was blatantly obvious that my left hand was unadorned. Maybe I could have a bit more fun with this. No, I was married for a couple of years, but we split up. We just drifted apart. We were too young when we got married, and we ended up divorced. I haven't found anyone else yet, but I keep looking. I'm thinking that it's time I settle down now. Well, I would definitely like to see you again. I find myself becoming quite attracted to you. It's not just that you're a fantastic lover, but I also enjoy our conversations and just being with you. What about your husband? You being married might cause some issues if we were to begin dating full-time. We're really no more than roommates right now. We don't even sleep in the same room. I can't even tell you the last time we had sex. Before I can start putting any real effort into a relationship, I need to deal with several business issues. I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling for the next few months. I'll get a hold of you when I'm through if you're still available. After 2 more rounds of sex, we cleaned up, packed up, and checked out of the hotel. She went her way, and I went mine with the promise of keeping in touch. I ripped up her business card and tossed it in the trash. As I was getting ready to board the airplane the next Monday, I contacted a security firm that I kept on retainer. They were to keep a close eye on Bev and my former family for at least the next few months. Contrary to what she had told me, she and her husband were far from simply roommates. The security firm managed to place hidden cameras and microphones inside the house. They averaged having sex 3 to 4 times a week. Yeah. It was illegal as hell, but this security company was really good at getting information. I didn't care about most of the stuff they did, but I needed some specific information. One thing I found out was that surprisingly, Brad was completely faithful to Beth. At least he was now. I can't say for sure about the previous 10 years. He was also wanting another kid, preferably a boy. I also found out that they had a ritual for the night before either one of them had to travel. They each tried to wear the other one out with sex. That made me smile. It was 2 months later when I got the last piece of news I was hoping for. I watched the camera feeds as she set up the living room for when Brad got home from work. I watched the reveal as Brad stepped through the door. Congratulations, Daddy. You managed to knock me up again. He was stunned, then overjoyed. How far along are you? He asked. About 2 months, she replied. You must have done it either the night before I had to leave for that week-long conference in Las Vegas or the night I got back. Apparently, she still believed that I was shooting blanks. She did call and leave a message tearfully telling me that she and her husband had reconciled and that she wouldn't be able to run off with me now. That gave me a good chuckle. After that, I had the security company remove all the cameras and stop watching them. I could get the rest of the information on my own. I set a reminder on my Outlook calendar for a couple of months down the line. It was just about dead on 9 months after the conference when I checked the birth announcements in my hometown. There was a picture of Bev holding a newborn baby boy with a smiling Brad looking over her shoulder. I had completed the management changeover of all my companies, and I was now looking at the picture over the internet from my hideaway in Costa Rica. No, I wasn't going to stay holed up here forever. It was just one of the places around the world that I owned. Besides, I was no longer Marvin Anderson. Good luck finding him. Besides, he wouldn't matter anymore. They would soon figure out that was just an alias anyway. Time to finish my revenge. I switched over to a new Gmail account I had set up just for this. Now, let's quickly see the story from the eyes of Beverly Curtis. It was 2 weeks since little Marvin was born. I'm still not completely sure how I managed to convince Brad to name him that. No, I was under no illusions that Marv was actually the father. Marv had a vasectomy and was shooting blanks. He even showed me the medical report. Brad had managed to knock me up the night before I flew to the conference or the night I got back home. I simply wanted to name him Marvin to secretly remind me of the fantastic week I had. My husband was ecstatic that we finally had a son. At first, he'd been acting a bit weird since a couple of days after the birth. I'm not sure what's going on, but something just isn't right. I had just put the baby down for a nap. Jenny was in her room, probably texting with her friends. I was just about to start making dinner when the front door suddenly slammed open. "You cheating witch!" Brad yelled at me. "How many times have you cheated on me?" I was shocked. I mean, there was no way that he could have found out about Las Vegas. Sure, I had started thinking about trying to snag Marv. Brad did have a lot of money, but Marv was a whole lot wealthier. When I found out that Brad and I were going to have another baby, I just couldn't leave Brad. "What are you talking about, Brad? I've never cheated on you." Seriously, it's been over 9 months since that conference in Vegas. There's no possible way he could have found out. At least, there couldn't possibly be any proof. He threw an envelope at me. It was at that point that I noticed his parents and the twin sisters had followed him into the house. I managed to catch the envelope just before it fell to the floor. "Who the hell is he?" Brad demanded. "I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about. About 2 weeks ago, I got an email with a link to a website showing a ton of videos of you screwing some strange guy while you were at the conference in Las Vegas 9 months ago. It also suggested that I get a DNA test done on the baby. It said there would be a couple of surprises in there. One big surprise is that I'm not the biological father." He took several deep breaths and continued, "I want to know who Marvin's real father is." I was shocked. Brad is his real father. That's when I opened the envelope. It was the result of a DNA test. It said that Brad was not the father. Well, actually, it said that there was only about a 40% chance that he was the father. Marvin carried some of the DNA Brad carried, but there was some other DNA that neither of us possessed. "Look, Brad, it shows that you and Marvin carry the same DNA." "No, it says that he carries only some of the same DNA, at best. It says that I would be in." He stopped speaking and got a really strange look on his face. "Oh my God, Michael!" That scream came from my mother-in-law. No, it couldn't be. Sure, there might have been a very slight resemblance, but Marv couldn't be Michael. DNA doesn't lie. Brad was definitely not the father, but he was a close relative of the real father. There were no other male relatives except Brad's father close enough to be a match, and I had definitely not had sex with my father-in-law. Marv was the only other man I'd slept with, and I realized that week was my fertile time. I was absolutely shocked. Suddenly, I began thinking, Michael was a genius with computers. How hard would it have been for him to fake a medical document like that? Then I remembered those 2 abortions when I took care of the pregnancies accidentally caused by Michael. I had purposely avoided having any children with him. Now, in the irony of all ironies, I had just had his son. I had confused Michael with his brother. I had accidentally confused Brad with Michael. He knew. He knew when he did it on purpose. I screamed out, "What are you talking about?" Nathan asked. I didn't recognize him. He looked completely different than he did 10 years ago. I'm sure he recognized me, though. He knew all the right buttons to push. He knew exactly what he was doing. He seduced me. He told me that he had a vasectomy. He even showed me a medical report. My cycle is as regular as clockwork. He must have remembered that I would be at my peak fertility that week. Oh my God, he must have remembered that I had those 2 abortions and purposely avoided having his children. Well, screw him. He sued me for Jenny's child support, so now I'm going to sue him for his own child support. Just as Michael Curtis had disappeared before, Marvin Anderson no longer existed. Brad's attempted child support suit went exactly nowhere. You can't sue someone that doesn't exist. Brad and Bev ended up staying together. He would be on the hook for child support for both Jenny and Marvin until they graduated from college. He would also have to pay child support, spousal support, mortgage on the house, and at least half of all their assets. It was cheaper to keep her. They stayed together, but their relationship was permanently destroyed. Now, they were living in a loveless marriage and had become roommates with benefits. They still had sex occasionally, but it was just sex. There was no more making love. They sold the house and quietly split up as soon as Marvin left for college. Don't worry about little Marvin. Sure, he was not the offspring of the favored brother, but he was still a cute, happy baby. His grandparents still spoiled him, and his mother still had her maternal instincts. The decision was made to never let anyone know about his true parentage. Besides, Brad always did want a son. They never had any more children. As for me, I did end up getting married again. We have 3 children, 1 boy and 2 girls. I think about them constantly. Every once in a while, I do think about my other son out there. Yes, it would be nice to visit with him and have him in my life, but that is simply not a possibility. Perhaps after he turns 18, I might see about quietly reaching out to him. When I finally die, he will be in for a shock. He is included in my will. As for my parents, I sent them 4 anonymous emails. The first one told them that I got married. Obviously, they were not at the wedding and never got to meet their new daughter-in-law. The other 3 emails were to tell them about the births of their grandchildren that they would never see. That was my punishment for them. I hear that they have spent a fortune on private investigators looking for me and my children. Good luck with that. So, you probably think I am a real asshole for what I did. I won't really argue with you on that. Just keep in mind what they did to me. I think I deserved a little payback. My brother cuckolded me, so I turned it around and cuckolded him. She purposefully refused to have my children when we were married, preferring to have my brother father her daughter. So, I tricked her into having my son while she was married to my brother. I think that's justice. Story 2. I'm 47 years old, and my wife is 45. We had a happy marriage for 22 years and were proud parents of 3 kids, a 20-year-old son and 2 lovely daughters aged 18 and 16. However, something significant happened on September 2001. On that day, my wife had planned to meet a man she met online at a nearby hotel. It was clear they wanted to have an affair because they had been exchanging texts and photos for several months. At that time, we had only been married for 2 years, and our son wasn't even a year old. It's hard to believe how different things were back then. Surprisingly, the tragic incident involving the New York Towers prevented her from going through with her plans. Her uncle was on the 84th floor of the South Tower and died instantly in the fall. The whole country mourned, and my wife was deeply affected by this news. I sympathized with her and supported her during this tough time. Overwhelmed by guilt, she eventually confessed her intentions to me and expressed deep regret. She assured me that their relationship hadn't gone beyond the emotional stage and even provided evidence to prove it. Before her confession, I had a vague feeling that something was wrong, but I never suspected she was emotionally involved with someone else. This revelation shocked me because I thought I knew my wife well. She had a strict upbringing that discouraged parties, drinking, and dating. She told me I was her first romantic partner when we started our relationship. After her confession on September 11th, I began to question everything I knew about her. If not for the tragedy, she might have gone through with her plan, and I wouldn't have suspected a thing. To consider reconciliation, I made it clear that she needed to see a psychologist. Despite this, I didn't see concrete evidence of her taking steps to address the issues that led to her actions. The betrayal remained a painful memory. Eventually, she did seek help from a psychologist and showed genuine remorse. We worked on healing our relationship, but trust, once broken, is fragile. We managed to smooth things out, but our trust was never the same. 19 years passed, and we had 2 more children. But on October 14th, 2019, that familiar feeling of doubt resurfaced, causing anxiety. Intuition can be unsettling, especially when it questions the stability of our relationship. One Monday morning, tensions escalated when our 18-year-old daughter had a heated argument with my wife before heading to school. Later, I made a mistake and tried to defuse the situation by playing with the family dog, which made our daughter burst out laughing. Surprisingly, my wife's reaction was unexpected. Overwhelmed with strong emotions, she looked upset and distant. To my surprise, the first alarm bell was her decision to disable the location data exchange function on her phone, which we used to track each other's location. This sudden change in behavior caused an instinctive feeling of anxiety. The trust we had been rebuilding needed more attention. Driven by the need to find clarity and confidence, I started looking for ways to access her phone, computer, and any other devices that could help resolve the situation. My actions were motivated by the desire to understand a situation where our relationship was again seriously tested. Today, we had to take our youngest to the post office to get a passport for her school trip. Since my wife works at the school where our daughter studies, she kindly offered to take her there, and I met them at the designated location. Both of us needed to be there for this task, but all the while, she seemed detached and distant. While we waited, there was an unsettling silence in the car, broken only by her periodic phone calls. It was clear she was engaged in correspondence with someone, which raised concerns in my mind and a desire to check her phone to ease my worries. She used to leave her phone unattended at home, but lately, she carried it everywhere. This change added to my unease. I also recalled her recent purchase of an iPad for her work, which I set up for her. We had discussed this acquisition multiple times, so her desire for it wasn't a surprise. Alongside her phone, the iPad became her constant companion, which she carried around the house. At one point, she left it unattended on the table, allowing me to investigate further. To my surprise, I found it locked with a code. This was unusual for us since we usually don't use codes on our devices. She explained that confidential student information was on the iPad, which made sense. However, there was still the possibility she used it for other purposes. On a Friday, we planned to meet at the bank to finalize a loan for our new house. After returning home, she mentioned having an errand to run. Curious, I checked our bank account and discovered that one of her errands was a visit to an adult store. This immediately raised suspicions. When I had the chance, I discreetly searched through her purchases and found beautiful underwear. Our life in bed was stagnant, mainly due to her lack of desire. This discovery led to a conversation. Frustrated by our lack of closeness, I decided to consult a doctor about it. During my research, I stumbled upon several websites discussing low libido in women. This piqued my curiosity and led me to dig deeper. I tried to observe her actions without being noticed and eventually discovered the access code to her iPad while she was with our daughter. With caution and determination, I accessed the device and saw a Facebook message from a stranger asking her to send a photo. Strangely, the app showed they weren't Facebook friends, which left me puzzled. It could have been a random person, but her reaction indicated she knew this individual. The conversation quickly became open, and when he suggested that she should leave our daughter and be with him, instead of keeping this information and its source hidden for better understanding, I made a hasty decision to confront her that evening. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a big mistake, as she lied about it and took immediate action. The affair remained a secret from others. She claimed the lingerie was for us, and she was trying to build up the courage to wear it for me. She said the person on Facebook was a former colleague from a summer job who suddenly started messaging her. She swore that their communication was only through texts and didn't involve any physical contact. Although I wanted to believe her, I found it hard to accept her explanations. I told her firmly that all of this needed to stop completely and immediately, and she agreed. The next day, I asked if the affair had truly ended, and she assured me it had. She didn't know I had seen their messages using other methods. I discovered that she had told him to unfriend her on Facebook due to my demands, which meant she had lied to me. And here I am 19 years later, facing a situation that feels all too familiar. At this moment, my emotions are a mess, and I'm confused. My appetite has decreased, I can't sleep well, and I find it hard to concentrate. To cope with this, I've scheduled consultations for myself later this week and started spending more time at the gym. This situation is extremely painful, and I don't want to deal with it. Since the day I learned the truth, I've been reading Psalm 81 almost daily. Initially, for several days, I managed to handle the situation relatively well, but today was especially tough. I barely slept last night, which worsened my emotional turmoil. On a brighter note, our son, who was born before the first affair, surprised us by giving us tickets to an event. He currently works at a nearby theater, and we were happy to attend the play Come From Away. We decided to pretend we were happy because it was an unexpected gift from him. In his early 20s, he's an exceptional person, and we didn't want to disappoint him with a refusal or lack of enthusiasm. If you're not familiar with the production, it's based on the events of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attack. It's worth mentioning that the date is historically significant, as are the feelings I had when we bought the tickets. Constant reminders of that specific date and time, as well as a recently reopened painful wound, kept me from fully immersing myself in what was happening. In different circumstances, in a different environment, I might have found pleasure in today's outing. But from the beginning, I wished to be anywhere but in that theater. To ease the discomfort, I started documenting my observations, noting dates, times, and my thoughts in a journal. I even developed a personal mantra to help me deal with similar situations: stay calm, stay patient, stay in control. I realize I need to be more consistent in applying this mantra, but I'm working on it diligently. I've made significant progress in improving my thinking. Now, as we get ready for our evening shopping, I'm determined to change my perspective on what's happening. As a result of my investigation, it turns out that her interactions with other men occurred during a summer school program where she worked as a teacher's assistant. During this program, she connected with a physical education teacher who turned out to be 32 years old, while my wife, who behaved inappropriately, is 47 years old. This situation can be described as her playing the role of a cougar. Her partner is a physical education teacher at a nearby school, while my wife works at another school, not even in the same district. She crossed paths with him during their joint participation in the summer school program, which accepts applications from teachers and staff from various districts who want to participate. This unique setup allows people with different levels of education to work together who wouldn't typically cooperate. I knew he would be in the program but chose to keep that knowledge to myself. At the moment, she remains unaware of my awareness. I decided to pay closer attention to their interactions and eventually found a message from her to him on Facebook with very interesting content. To my surprise, he seemed to brush her off, which made me smile. This led me to believe he saw her more as a friend and wanted to avoid a romantic relationship considering their significant age difference. She's 47, about 15 years older than him. My belief is based on previous messages where she mentioned going camping overnight, and he didn't respond. Later, I learned that she had told him about the trip. We had a few family conversations, but she didn't seem to share my perspective. However, I haven't made a final decision yet, even though I feel it's getting close. With significant life changes on the horizon, I believe it's crucial to have a well-established network of information sources. To do this, I use tools like voice recorders, GPS navigation devices, electronic codes, and so on. My goal is to gather as much concrete evidence as possible before taking any major steps. Additionally, I'm diligently studying and noting the divorce laws in my state. In time, I'll turn to legal professionals for advice and assistance. I've sought advice and recommendations from friends who have recently gone through a divorce, and their opinions will undoubtedly prove valuable in this challenging situation. I've also made the decision to take DNA samples from my 3 children, not because of doubt but solely for my peace of mind. Regardless of the results, my love for them remains unchanged. As for what I'm waiting for, it's a combination of collecting enough evidence and finding the courage to acknowledge the reality of our situation. The realization that our relationship is beyond repair is becoming more and more evident, and I know I have to face it head-on. Facing this harsh reality remains a daunting task, and I still struggle to confront it. Furthermore, I can't help but have a strong reluctance to expose my children to the turmoil of a divorce. Despite them being older, their well-being and emotional stability mean a lot to me, and I hesitate to subject them to the challenges and uncertainties that come with such significant life changes. Until this situation becomes entirely clear, I find myself in a peculiar position where part of me strangely takes some painful pleasure in listening to her conversations recorded on a dictaphone. This allows me to stay informed about recent events, such as her decision to unfriend a lot of people over the past couple of days. Yes, I admit I was spying in this regard, which understandably upset her. I'm well aware that my actions won't be seen positively, but it's important to note that for the past year or so, she's going through what I'd call a midlife crisis. She also lost her mother in November, which deeply affected her emotional state and made our already challenging circumstances even more difficult. Just 2 days after her mother's passing away, we tragically lost my father. Within 3 weeks, we lost 2 more relatives. Amid all this grief, Christmas came, and a series of misfortunes befell our family, and we experienced immense sorrow. I completely understand how these losses have profoundly affected her. Somewhere deep within me, a thought occurred: maybe her current state of mind is a result of these recent events, and perhaps I should try to create some separation between the pain caused by these losses and the additional mental anguish a divorce would bring. I'm willing to make that sacrifice to prioritize the well-being of my children and loved ones. I've made the tough choice to exercise patience a bit longer before rushing into decisions. Ending a 26-year-long relationship is far from simple, especially when you consider the intense love I felt for this woman throughout most of our marriage, a love that often consumed me. I can't deny the power of these emotions. I'm currently planning to spend this week searching for divorce lawyers, but I'm also aware that my daughter has a birthday next Sunday. So, I decided to talk to her after the event. Though I'm not certain about the exact words I'll use, I intend to let her know I'm actively seeking a lawyer. By then, I hope that I'll have found a suitable lawyer and be ready to initiate the divorce process. Well, I hope there might be a moment of realization and reflection on her part. I've reached the point where I no longer want to continue our marriage, given the strong evidence I've gathered of her extramarital affair. On February 11, 2022, I discreetly installed a voice recorder in her car. Interestingly, listening to the recorded conversations has given me a deeper understanding of what transpired after the incident. I've chosen to mentally prepare for potential consequences that may manifest soon. To combat my insomnia, I decided to use sleep aids for a restful night's sleep. Additionally, I've redirected my nervous energy into returning to the gym. Regarding my decreased appetite, I aim to shed a few extra pounds I gained during my absence from training. To address concentration issues, I've made it a practice to diligently jot down crucial information and mentally review the exact sequence of steps for everyday tasks I might forget. Finally, I've been troubled by night sweats, and I'm actively seeking remedies for that. When I stumbled upon these events, I quickly realized that this was another aspect that needed attention. I promptly collected some towels, t-shirts, and underwear and piled them up next to the bed. I assumed that handling these things, particularly during the cold winter months, could be especially challenging. After this initial reaction, a sense of relief washed over me. I no longer had to constantly hide, playing the roles of spies or investigators in our own marriage. I wouldn't need to tiptoe around sensitive topics to avoid upsetting her. Even before I had the chance to express my concerns, I understood that in recent months she'd been acting as though everything was fine, and this only intensified her frustration when I finally revealed everything to her. Receiving a box of her deceased mother's belongings from her father was a significant moment, but I surprisingly felt unaffected by it. Watching her reaction during our subsequent argument didn't evoke sympathy, sorrow, or sadness in me. After persistent persuasion and prodding, she finally asked, "What's wrong? Tell me what's bothering you." I simply mentioned his name. I noticed her excitement before she rushed out of the house. At that moment, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I no longer worried about her presence or felt tense as if I had to meet certain expectations or continually update her on my activities. As for recent events, something seemed amiss. Everything was going too smoothly for us, almost unnaturally so. Her unexpected kindness towards me raised suspicion. I noticed a peculiar change in her behavior. Things that would typically annoy her suddenly stopped bothering her. Initially, I viewed it as a sign of her newfound happiness, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at me. I decided to take on the role of a vigilant observer, imagining myself in metaphorical black sunglasses and a raincoat. I became a marriage detective. I discreetly installed a voice recorder in her car and activated the GPS navigation system. Casting a metaphorical fishing line, I was amazed to catch something on the first attempt. The recording contained 2 phone calls, the first of which indicated her intention to meet with him. Their meeting took place in a church parking lot and lasted about 40 minutes. Fortunately, I was spared the need to listen to their communication. While she walked to his car, she made a subsequent phone call to her trusted friend living on the other side of the country, who served as her confidant. If talking to him wasn't enough to confirm my suspicions, and I have no doubt about it, I could find additional evidence in this call. but if I truly wanted to remain in the dark, then her call to him would be decisive. The subsequent conversation between us followed a familiar pattern characteristic of her. She tried to downplay or deny her involvement in the betrayal, shifting the blame to another. It's my mistake that she harbored a grudge about missed opportunities in her life before our marriage. She didn't have the opportunity to go to college or lead a carefree bachelor life. Regrettably, I take responsibility for this, and she holds some resentment towards me. I've already conveyed to her that if she wishes to end our relationship, I will understand, yet she's chosen to stay, making it clear that her betrayal is entirely her own decision. While I acknowledge my flaws as a husband, it's important to recognize that I wasn't married to a flawless individual either. The notion that I have an ideal wife seems undeserved in my case. Consequently, I've reached out to divorced women I know for lawyer recommendations and strategic guidance. I've come to the realization that it's time to bring this to a close. My wife, who has withdrawn from our relationship, has demonstrated her lack of commitment to reconciliation. I'm unwilling to subject myself to the risk of potential future betrayals. Hence, I'm leaning towards a divorce. Are there any specific tips or techniques I should acquaint myself with during this process? I'm still engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. In a moment of acute disappointment, I impulsively struck the wall with my fist, fortunately causing no negative influence to myself or the building. In the empty house's confined space, I vented my pent-up emotions, shouting a curse word at the top of my lungs. Thankfully, no one was present to witness this outburst. During a vulnerable moment, I couldn't hold back tears and broke down during a phone conversation with my best friend. In that state, I began to daydream about a beautiful reconciliation, hoping that everything would miraculously fall back into place. In my relationship with my wife, I wondered if it would be so terrible if we managed to salvage our relationship with a little more effort on my part, granting her happiness. However, deep down, I recognize that these thoughts are mere false hopes, and divorce is the right path. I've repeated this to my mother, to the friends I've confided in, and to myself countless times since the betrayal came to light. We've largely been avoiding each other, and during those moments, I keenly feel her absence. Changing our dynamics has proven to be incredibly challenging. We used to exchange text messages during the day at work, checking in on each other, sharing updates during breaks, and having light conversations. Casual hugs and kisses were commonplace, but now, back at home, all of that has ceased. As mentioned before, we actively steer clear of each other within our home. She's chosen to sleep on the couch instead of our bed. Previously, one of my simple morning joys was gently waking her up when the alarm went off. I'd roll over onto my back, stroke her back or arm, and softly whisper, "Hey honey, it's time." Unfortunately, those bed life moments are a thing of the past. Every morning, I'd wake her up with a gentle touch and a nearly inaudible whisper that always brought a smile to my face. Despite the circumstances, she hasn't left, and we haven't officially separated, but deep down, I understand what needs to be done. Though I know it won't be an easy journey, I find solace in the hope that a glimmer of light awaits me at the end of this long, dark, and lonely tunnel. It's distressing to witness her envy of our children who have opportunities to travel and participate in exciting events through their involvement in the school musical group. It's essential to note that neither she nor I had the chance to experience these opportunities ourselves. I find joy in witnessing my children's happiness and the opportunities they have, which I didn't. Over the past 2 decades, I've dedicated my time to participating in a fairly well-known local band, which has allowed me to perform at some wonderful events. However, my wife is envious of these opportunities. She disregards the countless hours of practice and study I've put into reaching a level that allows me to pursue this hobby. Curiously, she often shares stories with me about people she encountered at work who heard or followed our music. It appears that she takes pride in being married to a man who attracts attention. One day, my wife expressed her displeasure, stating that I leave her alone with the children when I go to play. Yet, it's important to note that I worked and came home with earnings in my pocket. While I enjoyed my time, there's no denying that performing music in front of an audience can be incredibly exhilarating. I had to handle concert arrangements, communicate with bar owners, maintain a flawless rhythm, and gauge audience reactions. Despite the fatigue that late-night performances brought, I'd still wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning for a full day's work. Balancing these responsibilities made the day challenging and lengthy, but it was necessary because we needed the income to build the house she desired. Leaving the band wasn't a viable option, as it was a significant source of income for me. It's worth noting that she had her own job, but my earnings from performances were comparable to what she made from her steady job. Furthermore, this situation infuriated her, as it turned out that my real job paid 3 to 4 times more than hers. I made it my mission to provide my family with the life I believed they deserved. However, instead of gratitude, all I received was resentment. The age-old saying, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them," rang true in my case. Unfortunately, it took me far too long to understand the true nature of the man I married. Consequently, I've arrived at the same conclusion: if we continue to stay together, I'd essentially be subscribing to another cycle of frustration and dissatisfaction. In this regard, I've gathered recommendations for several lawyers and will be scheduling appointments with them in the near future. Unfortunately, I don't see a viable solution or future for our relationship. Divorce may not be an immediate outcome, but it has become evident that there is no foundation for salvaging our relationship. Paradoxically, those who know her outside of our home perceive her as a wonderful person, a warm, caring, exceptional mother who consistently assists others, and I can confirm that she genuinely fulfills these roles. But within our family, reality differs from perception. She exhibits the traits I described earlier. It appears that she has succumbed to what I refer to as the POM syndrome. This individual is her coworker who, as it turns out, is married to another coworker. I haven't shared this information with her family yet. As far as I know, her father and his sister are the only relatives she has left. Although I don't communicate with them very often, I intend to inform her father at some point. I've also reached out to the wife of the man who betrayed us, but unfortunately, she hasn't responded. If I don't receive a reply, I'll send another email in a couple of days with more details, and then I'll respect her decision if she chooses not to engage further. Tonight, I gathered the courage to talk to my wife about wanting a divorce. Hugs and tears, the bed life moments we once shared, are now a thing of the past. Thankfully, she understood the gravity of the situation. We engaged in a bittersweet conversation, reminiscing about how we wished things could be different. Summoning the courage, I asked her a tough question: "Did you not consider this outcome when you made this choice?" She admitted she was aware but remained deeply upset. It's painful to witness her suffering despite my deep love for this woman. I've come to the realization that I can't continue this relationship. It's a choice I don't want to make, but it's necessary. I believe I'll find solace in the fact that I won't be tied to her anymore. Our band is currently on hold, but I'm actively seeking other musical opportunities, specializing in classic rock with brass elements like Chicago. I eagerly await the day when the difficult path I'm on leads to strength and stability. Though I acknowledge the challenges ahead, I'm confident in my ability to emerge from this in a positive state. While she mentioned the possibility of seeking counseling and reconciliation, I firmly closed that topic and recommended counseling for her own well-being. At this point, I only feel responsible for not ending the relationship sooner. I haven't committed any other wrongs in recent years. On the contrary, I've strived to be a devoted husband, prioritizing her as the most important person in my life. Despite all my efforts, I found myself in this situation. I'm often torn between wanting to save my marriage and remembering why it's no longer possible. This sadness reinforces my readiness to move on. Although I reached out to another betrayed spouse by email, I didn't receive a response. Following advice from another source, I mustered the courage to call and share the truth. I've never felt so terrible, even though I know I did nothing wrong in conveying the information she needed to know. Watching her heartbreak, I felt responsible for her suffering. It was like reliving the shock and devastation. Breaking someone's heart, even unintentionally, is incredibly difficult. I assured her that even though we'd never met in person, I'd be there for her through phone or SMS. Our conversation turned out to be therapeutic for me as well. After discussing our experiences, I have a clear understanding of the situation. She expressed her gratitude, convincing me that I made the right decision. Despite the complexity of the conversation, I was genuinely interested in hearing her perspective on his behavior. It seems she might have fabricated an unhappy marriage story to gain sympathy and create a closer connection with him. While I acknowledge her involvement in this situation, it's possible she manipulated him by feeding into his desires. My wife is still unaware of this situation. I rejected a man involved in infidelity, which resulted in 2 families being torn apart, leaving 6 children to wonder why their parents caused them such pain. Perhaps comparing salaries would shed light on the situation, but it didn't occur to me at the moment. I've stopped communicating with her and try to avoid being in the same room unless it involves our children or household duties. Recently, there's been a noticeable coldness in our home. It appears she's slowly realizing she's crossed a line. I take measures to protect myself, seeking legal advice and support from friends while planning to move forward. It seems she doesn't fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. To create distance, I limit our conversations to important topics like home, children, and finances. I'd rather not share a room with her. She's starting to comprehend the gravity of the situation but seems to expect me to either ignore what happened or make a desperate attempt to save our relationship. In the past, I failed to assert my needs and desire to stay together. I settled for apologies and minimal changes. I apologize for my previous passivity, but I'm adopting a different approach now. I've completely changed my behavior, refraining from casual conversations and small talk with her. Those interactions are a thing of the past. She seems to struggle with accepting my decision to let go of various aspects of our relationship. Witnessing this is quite disheartening. She doesn't realize that the issues in our marriage are entirely on her shoulders. I understand that I may never get an answer to the why question. The question why remains despite all the challenges. Tonight was a positive one. We spent time as a family at an event celebrating my youngest daughter's performance in the school musical. The best daughter, she had a significant role and gave an impressive performance. Watching her sing, dance, and savor each moment on stage was heartwarming. During the performance, my wife sat beside my mother, who is aware of our situation, even though my wife doesn't know what my mother knows. I couldn't help but feel sorry for my mom, who must have been in an awkward position. When I finally told my mom the truth, she was genuinely shocked. She mentioned how we always seemed happy together, and she truly loved my wife like her own daughter. Another person who had experienced betrayal contacted me with a text message during the performance, expressing concern about how I was holding up. This individual's husband, involved in infidelity, was temporarily sent away by another wife. She discovered that he sought refuge with a friend who, as it turned out, was absent. This raised concerns about possible inappropriate behavior. I was relieved to reassure her that her fears were unfounded. However, I'm also plagued by painful memories and obsessive thoughts. Despite my hopes for reconciliation and finding a way to repair our relationship, I'm increasingly convinced that divorce is the most reasonable choice. I understand that under the circumstances, this may seem early or uncertain. But continuing the relationship appears completely untenable. The only sensible option right now seems to be divorce, despite my occasional desire to salvage our shattered life and family. Yet these moments of nostalgia and hope are fleeting. They're part of the healing process, but they quickly fade, giving way to the harsh reality that staying with her isn't worthwhile. I see this shift as progress because it makes me question why she, seemingly a normal person raised in a devout Christian family, would engage in such a reprehensible act, contrary to the principles and moral boundaries instilled in her from childhood. Tonight marked a turning point. I followed her to the parking lot where she stood for a while, then went to the store and returned to the parking lot. As I watched from the sidelines, I couldn't help but wonder what was happening. My intuition told me she was with him, prompting me to investigate further. To my shock, I found her car parked next to his. In the process of clarifying the situation, I contacted his wife, with whom I'd been communicating for the past few days. She encouraged me to approach them, introduce myself, and take a photo as evidence. Following her advice, I asked my wife not to return home that evening, and I continued my way home alone. She called me crying and apologizing. Reluctantly, I agreed to pick up my things, hoping that she would leave for a while. This is how I finally got all the answers, and a new chapter in this turbulent journey began. However, there was an unexpected twist. The DNA test results for my 3 children remained untouched in the mailbox where we kept our mail, and anyone could have taken them. Since I rarely received physical mail, I had forgotten about them. I had always believed all 3 children were mine, but to my astonishment, it turned out that my eldest son was not biologically mine. This revelation surprised me with such force that I was utterly stunned. I hadn't expected such a betrayal, and realizing she must have been unfaithful in the early years of our marriage, my heart was irreparably shattered into countless pieces. I understood that it was necessary to be honest with my children, even if it meant delivering heart-wrenching news. So last night, I mustered the courage to tell my son the truth. It was an emotionally charged moment filled with tight hugs and tears. Meanwhile, my soon-to-be ex-wife was still absent from home after I caught her red-handed in the car with her lover. Though he's not my biological son, I raised him as my own, and he holds a special place in my heart. In his 20s, he grew into a wonderful young man of whom any father could be proud. However, he's not yet ready to confront his mother over her actions. It was with a heavy heart that I made the tough decision to share this news with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I called her on the phone, gathered my strength, and revealed the truth. As expected, she burst into tears and apologized. She wanted to return home, but I firmly advised her to stay where she was for now. Regardless of the DNA results, I reassured myself that he was still my son. Our connection transcends genetics. Throughout this ordeal, I never concealed my love for the children and reminded them of it every day. Surprisingly, now that the truth has come to light, I feel relieved. The constant worry of playing the role of a marriage detective and concerns about her actions are over. This marks a new chapter, free from lies and uncertainty. Finally, I can let go of this burden and breathe a bit easier. Gone are the days when I tiptoed around her, always on edge. It's all behind me now. My children and I have embarked on the path of healing, and though it won't be easy, we found a sense of peace amid the chaos. In the upcoming days, weeks, and months, we undoubtedly experience a range of emotions. But I saw a way out of this darkness until the most tragic thing occurred in our lives with the children. Even though we were all angry with my soon-to-be ex-wife, we felt real sorrow and pain when we learned of her passing away in a car accident due to brake failure. Our world crumbled. It initially appeared to be an accident, but later, surveillance cameras revealed that her lover's wife intentionally tampered with the brake lines while my wife was with her lover and his friend at their house. The other wife broke into the garage and committed this act. She couldn't forgive them for their transgressions. Her involvement in my wife's end of life was confirmed, and she was sentenced to 8 years in prison. As we and the children cope with this devastating loss, it's a challenging journey. Unfortunately, life throws us curveballs, but the key is to get through it and learn from the experience.